It wasn't an economic meltdown or a sudden disaster. It was a tariff. A tariff so devastating that it shattered the backbone of American automotive pride. Overnight, factories shut down. Thousands of workers were sent home, and the cars that once symbolized freedom and power became luxury items few could afford. When President Donald Trump unleashed a massive tariff on imported cars and parts, it didn't just hit the bottom line, it struck at the very soul of American car culture. Jeep's rugged spirit, Dodge's muscle car dominance, Ram's working-class reliability, and Chrysler's legacy of innovation. Everything was suddenly at risk. Can these iconic brands survive the fallout? Will Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Chrysler find a way to strike back? Or are we witnessing the end of an era? Stay tuned, because what comes next could change how we see these legendary names forever. What's happening? The American auto industry is in the midst of a crisis that no one saw coming. A tariff so devastating that it has brought iconic brands like Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Chrysler to the brink of collapse. Once symbols of freedom, power, and reliability, these automotive giants are now caught in a turbulent economic storm. Workers, enthusiasts, and loyal customers alike are left questioning whether these legendary names will ever fully recover. Jeep, the embodiment of ruggedness and adventure, now faces an unprecedented challenge. The heart of the problem lies in Tuca, Mexico, where the popular Compass model was assembled. New tariffs on imported parts made critical components, engines, electronics, and specialized steel significantly more expensive overnight. As production costs soared, Stellantis, Jeep's parent company, was forced to halt manufacturing at the Tuca plant. This disruption left dealerships across the United States scrambling as the Compass became increasingly scarce. Customers eager to drive off in a new Jeep found themselves on waiting lists, stretching for months, while dealers faced mounting frustration from buyers wondering why their orders had been delayed indefinitely. The impact did not stop with the Compass. Jeep's American-made models, like the Wrangler and the Grand Cherokee, also suffered production setbacks. Canadian and Mexican parts essential for assembly became harder to procure, leaving factories stuck in a logistical chokehold. Production slowed, unfinished vehicles piled up on the lines, and Jeep's dependable image started to waver. Online forums filled with speculation from dedicated fans, wondering whether Jeep's legacy of rugged reliability could withstand the pressure. Was this the beginning of the end for a brand that had survived wars and wilderness? As Jeep struggled, Dodge was battling a crisis of its own. The brand, synonymous with muscle and raw power, found itself fighting to remain relevant. At the Brampton, Canada plant, where the legendary Charger and Challenger models rolled off the line, the tariffs struck hard. Transmissions, specialized steel, and other critical components faced steep import duties, pushing production costs through the roof. The iconic roar of Dodge's muscle cars was not just being silenced on the road, but also on the factory floor. Manufacturing slowed, so did sales. Dealerships reported dwindling inventories and rising prices, pushing Dodge's once affordable muscle cars out of reach for many fans. Enthusiasts who had grown up dreaming of owning a Charger or Challenger suddenly found the price tags thousands of dollars higher, turning cherished performance icons into luxury items. Social media buzzed with complaints about the perceived betrayal of Dodge's working-class spirit, and muscle car clubs that once celebrated American power now questioned whether the brand had lost its way. Meanwhile, Ram trucks, long regarded as the workhorses of America, also faced a harsh reality. The Sterling Heights plant in Michigan, where the iconic Ram 1500 is produced, struggled with soaring costs as engines from Mexico and electronics from Canada became pricier. Suddenly, the dependable Ram 1500 jumped by thousands of dollars, leaving contractors, farmers, and blue-collar workers in disbelief. A longtime Ram owner from Ohio expressed the sentiment bluntly, "I've been buying Rams for 20 years because they're tough and affordable. Now they're neither." Loyal customers, feeling betrayed, began looking at foreign alternatives that managed to keep prices stable. Finally, Chrysler, once a symbol of American automotive luxury, faced an existential crisis. Stellantis announced the shutdown of Chrysler's Windsor plant, where popular models like the Pacifica and Voyager were manufactured. The closure displaced thousands of workers and left Chrysler dealerships without inventory, forcing families to consider costlier or less suitable alternatives. Longtime fans shared their frustration online, lamenting the end of an era where Chrysler's minivans symbolized both quality and affordability. These challenges are not just business setbacks, they represent a fracture in the identity of American car culture. Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Chrysler were once more than brands. They were cultural icons, embodying freedom, power, and rugged reliability. Now, with rising costs and declining loyalty, their future hangs in the balance. As Stellantis struggles to navigate the turbulent landscape, one question remains: can these brands find a way to reclaim their place in the American automotive legacy? Or will they become relics of a bygone era? We put in countless hours analyzing data, reviewing industry reports, and breaking down the real impact of these changes. If you appreciate our effort to keep you informed, please like this video and subscribe for more in-depth content. The price surge that shook America. What if your next car suddenly cost $4,000 more overnight? That's the reality facing countless American consumers in the wake of Stellantis production cuts. With tariffs pushing manufacturing costs through the roof, automakers across the board have been forced to reconsider their pricing strategies. The resulting price surge has left many potential buyers questioning whether they can afford to stay loyal to their favorite brands. Economic analysts are projecting a significant rise in vehicle prices, with some models expected to increase by $2,000 to $4,000 within the next year. The Jeep Compass, already a favorite among compact SUV enthusiasts, has seen its base model price inch closer to $30,000. Meanwhile, the Ram 1500, the dependable workhorse of countless contractors and farmers, may soon surpass $50,000 for even the most basic trim. For many middle-class families, these numbers are not just daunting, they're devastating. Dealers are struggling to manage the fallout. With production down and demand still high, many have resorted to adding hefty markups on the few models they still have in stock. Customers who were previously on waiting lists are being told they'll either have to pay more or wait even longer. This has led to a surge in cancellations and a growing sense of frustration among consumers. In rural areas where the Ram 1500 is a staple, longtime customers feel particularly betrayed. Their once dependable trucks are now out of financial reach, forcing many to consider switching to rival brands that are less affected by the tariffs. For urban families who had planned to upgrade to a new Jeep Compass or Chrysler Pacifica, the cost increase has prompted a reassessment of priorities. Some are choosing to extend the life of their current vehicles, despite rising maintenance costs. Others are reluctantly looking at smaller, more fuel-efficient models from foreign manufacturers, which have managed to keep their prices more stable by relying on diversified global supply chains. Beyond the individual impact, the broader economic consequences are profound. Car loans are becoming harder to secure as lenders reassess the risk associated with financing more expensive vehicles. Consumers who already have tight budgets are finding it increasingly difficult to justify the cost of a new purchase. In an economy already struggling with inflation, the sudden spike in vehicle prices could further strain household finances. Yet it wasn't just consumers feeling the heat. Politicians were next in line. As voters voiced their dissatisfaction, policymakers were forced to confront the unintended consequences of the tariffs. The political fallout was just beginning, and it threatened to reshape the conversation around economic nationalism. Political fallout, Trump's calculated gamble. Did Trump's bold economic move just backfire in the most unexpected way? The tariffs were meant to bring jobs back to American soil, but instead they've triggered a wave of economic anxiety and public backlash. While some Republicans hailed the move as a necessary step to curb outsourcing, the reality on the ground is far more complex and contentious. Within days of the tariff announcement, political tensions began to escalate. Republican leaders from manufacturing-heavy states defended the policy, emphasizing the need to protect American jobs from overseas competition. However, as news of layoffs and plant closures spread, even some of Trump's most ardent supporters began to waver. In states like Michigan and Ohio, where Stellantis plants are significant employers, workers who once cheered Trump's commitment to American industry now felt abandoned. On the Democratic side, lawmakers criticized the tariffs as reckless and poorly planned. They argued that the fallout demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of the modern global economy. Instead of revitalizing American manufacturing, they claimed, the policy was simply accelerating the decline of traditional auto jobs. Public debates grew increasingly heated, with union representatives voicing their disapproval and calling for a more balanced approach. For Trump's core supporters, the reality of seeing family members lose jobs was deeply unsettling. Town hall meetings in affected areas grew tense as residents demanded answers. How could a policy aimed at protecting jobs result in mass layoffs? As the political divide grew, it became clear that the issue was no longer just economic. It was deeply personal and emotional. And as politicians clashed, the industry began to strike back. Stellantis, under mounting pressure, was forced to rethink its approach. The auto giant knew that survival meant transformation, even if it meant risking everything in the process. Stellantis' risky counterattack: to survive, Stellantis must become something it's never been before, a champion of sustainable innovation. Faced with the harsh reality of plummeting sales and escalating production costs, Stellantis has devised a bold new strategy, pivoting toward electric vehicles and hybrids. The company's new flagship models, the Jeep Wagoneer S, the Dodge Electric Charger, and the Ram hybrid truck, represent a decisive break from tradition. While the shift toward electric vehicles has been years in the making, the urgency imposed by tariffs has pushed Stellantis to accelerate development. The challenge now is not just to innovate, but to convince loyal customers that these new models can maintain the brand's rugged, powerful identities. But as Stellantis prepared its comeback, the industry faced a greater reckoning. Would this pivot be enough to save the brands, or had the damage already been done? Ford and GM's calculated responses. When Stellantis faltered, rivals like Ford and General Motors were expected to take over. But were they prepared? Initially, industry analysts and consumers alike believed that the challenges facing Stellantis would translate into opportunities for other American automakers. As news of Stellantis plant closures and layoffs spread, Ford and General Motors saw brief spikes in their stock prices. Investors speculated that these traditional giants would seize the moment to capture Stellantis' lost market share. However, as the reality of the situation unfolded, it became clear that Ford and General Motors were not entirely insulated from the same economic pressures. Faced with the sudden vacuum left by Stellantis, both Ford and General Motors had to make strategic decisions to maintain stability while capitalizing on potential gains. One of the first moves was to shift more production to the United States, even though domestic manufacturing came with significantly higher costs. Labor expenses in American plants are nearly double compared to facilities in Mexico or Canada, but Ford and General Motors recognized that maintaining a stable domestic output was crucial to keeping dealerships supplied and customers loyal. By prioritizing local production, they aimed to prevent disruptions similar to those that had devastated Stellantis. However, ramping up domestic production was not a straightforward task. Both automakers had relied heavily on international supply chains to minimize costs and increase efficiency. Now, with the new tariffs in place, they were forced to reconsider their reliance on imported components. General Motors, for instance, faced challenges with its electric vehicle lineup. Batteries sourced from Mexico suddenly became far more expensive, threatening the profitability of models like the Chevrolet Bolt. Ford's F-Series trucks, some of which incorporate Canadian-made parts, also faced production delays and increased costs. The challenge was not just shifting production, but restructuring entire supply chains in a way that did not compromise quality or affordability. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, both companies made strategic pivots in their product lines. Ford accelerated plans to produce electric trucks domestically, showcasing models like the F-150 Lightning as symbols of American innovation. General Motors, on the other hand, fast-tracked its transition to electric vehicles by investing more heavily in US-based battery production. Executives emphasized that increasing domestic output would not only mitigate tariff impacts, but also position the companies as patriotic choices for consumers who valued American-made products. As Ford and General Motors worked to adapt, they also faced a new challenge: consumer perception. Many buyers still viewed both brands as susceptible to the same vulnerabilities that had struck Stellantis. Would the promised increase in domestic production be enough to maintain loyalty, or would consumers look elsewhere, driven by the fear of rising costs and potential shortages? As the automakers attempted to reassure their customer base, it became clear that the road ahead would be complicated. But while automakers adjusted, workers had a different reaction. International rivals step up. While American brands struggled, global competitors saw a golden opportunity as Stellantis, Ford, and General Motors scrambled to realign their production strategies. Foreign automakers swiftly moved to capitalize on the situation. Asian and European manufacturers, sensing an opening in the U.S. market, accelerated their own plans to fill the gap left by Stellantis' downturn. Among the most aggressive players were Asian giants like Toyota and Hyundai. Both companies had already established substantial manufacturing footprints in the United States, allowing them to sidestep many of the tariff issues plaguing American brands. As Stellantis plants fell idle and workers faced uncertainty, Toyota announced an expansion of its Kentucky facility to produce more electric SUVs. Similarly, Hyundai unveiled plans to increase output at its Alabama plant, focusing on compact sedans and crossovers that had suddenly become more appealing as American-made alternatives grew scarce. Chinese automakers, particularly BYD, also sensed a unique opportunity to enter the American market with affordable electric models. With Stellantis struggling to keep its electric vehicle plans on track, BYD marketed itself as a cost-effective, reliable alternative. The company's electric sedans, priced significantly lower than their American counterparts, began to gain traction among consumers looking for practical, budget-friendly options. As BYD ramped up production in China and negotiated deals with U.S. importers, it became clear that the Chinese brand intended to make a lasting impact on the market. European automakers like Volkswagen and BMW also moved strategically. Volkswagen, which had previously positioned itself as a leader in affordable electric vehicles, increased production at its Tennessee plant. The move was designed to reinforce the brand's reputation as both cost-efficient and locally committed. BMW, meanwhile, capitalized on its luxury appeal, marketing its American-made SUVs as premium choices unaffected by the tariff crisis. By emphasizing quality and stability, BMW aimed to attract buyers disillusioned with the unpredictability of traditional American brands. These international strategies not only helped fill the immediate void, but also threatened to permanently shift market dynamics. American consumers, now wary of sudden price increases from domestic brands, began to view foreign automakers as more stable and reliable. This shift in perception posed a long-term challenge for Stellantis, Ford, and General Motors. As global brands continued to thrive, American workers reached a breaking point. The Worker Uprising, a fight for survival. When factories went silent, workers didn't just sit back, they fought back. As Stellantis plants closed and workers found themselves suddenly unemployed, frustration gave way to organized resistance. At the Sterling Heights assembly plant, where Ram trucks had once rolled off the lines daily, workers staged spontaneous sit-ins. The goal was not just to protest job losses, but to demand accountability from both Stellantis and the government for policies that had led to mass layoffs. In Brampton, where Dodge muscle cars had once symbolized power and pride, employees gathered outside the factory gates with signs reading, "Save our jobs" and "Bring back production." These protests were not orchestrated by union leadership, but grew organically as workers communicated through social media and community networks. Inspired by these grassroots efforts, other Stellantis workers from shuttered plants across North America began organizing similar demonstrations, determined to keep the pressure on the company and political leaders. The online sphere also became a hotbed of resistance. The hashtag Save Our Jobs began trending on social media as workers shared their stories of job loss, financial uncertainty, and the devastating impact on their families. Community allies joined the online movement, amplifying calls for government intervention and fair treatment. These digital campaigns were crucial in maintaining momentum, ensuring that workers' voices reached beyond factory walls and into the public consciousness. As the protests continued, union leaders, initially hesitant, took notice. Recognizing the power of the movement, they began to organize formal rallies and petition drives, demanding that Stellantis and other automakers guarantee job security and resist outsourcing. Calls for government subsidies to maintain domestic production gained traction, with unions pushing for legislation that would protect manufacturing jobs from the unintended consequences of new tariffs. Just when it seemed the heart of American car culture was fading, a new movement took shape: the death of American car culture. For decades, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Chrysler have been more than just automotive brands. They have embodied the essence of American identity, representing freedom, power, ruggedness, and luxury. From the iconic Jeep Wrangler, known for conquering tough terrains, to the Dodge Charger, a symbol of muscle car dominance, these vehicles have shaped how Americans perceive themselves on the road. Ram trucks, built to withstand the harshest conditions, have long been the dependable choice for farmers and contractors. Meanwhile, Chrysler's minivans have provided practical comfort for countless families. These brands were more than products, they were cultural touchstones. However, that identity now stands on shaky ground. The economic turmoil triggered by Trump's aggressive tariffs has shifted these iconic brands from essential American symbols to luxury items, accessible to only a select few. As production costs soared due to tariffs on imported components, Stellantis found itself forced to raise vehicle prices dramatically. Suddenly, the once affordable Jeep Compass became a financial stretch, and even the basic Ram 1500 models climbed beyond the budget of the average buyer. Dodge's powerful muscle cars, once a source of pride for working-class enthusiasts, now come with price tags that align more with luxury imports than with blue-collar accessibility. The loss of affordability has led to a growing cultural disconnect. Jeep, once the embodiment of adventure and freedom, now feels like a privilege rather than a standard choice. Ram trucks, traditionally the backbone of rural America, are becoming status symbols rather than practical tools. Dodge's muscle cars are no longer the rebellious, accessible machines that roared down Main Street. They are priced out of reach for the average gearhead. Chrysler, too, is losing relevance, as the practical family minivan now costs more than some sedans, pushing families toward more economical choices. For many longtime fans, this transformation feels like a betrayal. Owning a Jeep or a Dodge used to mean embracing a unique piece of American culture, a connection to tradition and craftsmanship. Now, with these vehicles priced more like luxury items, that connection is fading. Social media is flooded with comments from frustrated owners who feel that the essence of these brands is being compromised. The sentiment is clear. If these cars no longer reflect American resilience and affordability, are they truly American anymore? Yet, despite this sense of loss, a new cultural movement is emerging. Just as the brands themselves struggle to stay relevant, car enthusiasts across the country are finding unexpected ways to keep the spirit of American automotive culture alive. While American car culture seemed destined to fade, something unexpected began to happen. The rise of DIY and underground car culture, as Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Chrysler become increasingly unattainable. A passionate community of car enthusiasts has taken matters into their own hands. Instead of giving up on their beloved brands, they are reviving them through creativity, craftsmanship, and a sense of communal pride. The rise of do-it-yourself culture and underground car movements is breathing new life into these iconic vehicles, even as the corporate world struggles to keep up. Across the country, car enthusiasts are pooling resources to preserve and maintain older models of Jeeps, Dodges, and Rams. In small garages and makeshift workshops, skilled mechanics and hobbyists are restoring aging Wranglers, classic Chargers, and rugged Ram trucks. These dedicated individuals are not just maintaining cars, they are preserving the legacy of American automotive culture. From custom suspension jobs on old Wranglers to converting Dodge Challengers into hybrid muscle cars, innovation is thriving where corporate strategy failed. Online communities play a crucial role in this revival. Platforms like Reddit, Facebook, and specialized automotive forums have become hubs for sharing repair hacks, sourcing rare parts, and offering technical advice. In one forum, a Ram owner detailed how he retrofitted his 2500 model with custom-built electronics to bypass costly dealership repairs. Another group specializes in salvaging parts from wrecked Jeeps to keep older models on the road. The dedication is palpable, as thousands of users exchange knowledge to keep their favorite cars running despite the economic challenges. New custom car shops are also emerging to meet the demand for maintaining and upgrading these vehicles. No longer just a niche market, these shops offer affordable alternatives to dealership service. In Detroit, a small garage called Old Iron Customs has gained a reputation for restoring second-generation Dodge Chargers with modern performance upgrades. In Colorado, Jeep enthusiasts flock to Trailmasters, where they rebuild Wranglers to tackle off-road trails just as their predecessors did. This grassroots movement is not just about keeping cars functional, it is about preserving a cultural legacy. As dealerships close and corporate decisions distance the brands from their roots, car owners are reclaiming the narrative. Instead of waiting for Stellantis to make affordable options available again, they are creating their own path, one restored engine at a time. The sense of ownership extends beyond the vehicles. It touches the very essence of what it means to be an American car enthusiast. As car enthusiasts fought to preserve the past, Stellantis was already planning for a radically different future. Stellantis Gamble, reinventing American icons. In a move that could either save or shatter its legacy, Stellantis is pivoting towards electric and hybrid vehicles. Faced with economic challenges and changing consumer expectations, the company has committed to transforming its iconic brands into sustainable pioneers. The strategy is risky, but Stellantis believes it is essential for survival in a rapidly evolving automotive market. The Jeep Wagoneer S, a fully electric SUV, aims to combine luxury with rugged performance. Marketed as an eco-friendly alternative without compromising off-road capability, the Wagoneer S is Stellantis's bet on keeping Jeep relevant in a green future. Similarly, the Dodge electric Charger promises to retain the brand's signature power while reducing emissions. It is a bold reimagining of muscle car heritage, one that aims to keep the spirit of speed alive while embracing modern technology. Ram's hybrid trucks are another critical component of Stellantis' plan. Blending traditional power with electric efficiency, these models aim to appeal to working-class buyers who value both performance and fuel savings. By targeting contractors and rural consumers, Stellantis hopes to prevent Ram from losing ground in the pickup market. However, the reaction from enthusiasts has been mixed. While some see these moves as innovative and necessary, others feel alienated. For die-hard fans, the essence of a Jeep is its ability to tackle rough terrains with a gas-powered growl, not a quiet hum. Dodge enthusiasts fear that electric Chargers will lack the raw, visceral power that defines the brand. Ram loyalists worry that hybrid models will lack the durability needed for heavy-duty tasks. The fate of Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Chrysler hangs in the balance. Can these iconic brands survive the shift? Or is this the end of an era? But these brands are not the only ones who are struggling. Three of the most well-known brands in the history of the automobile industry, Mercedes, BMW, and Audi, have abruptly abandoned the American market. No tour of the press, not a warning. Just one policy that led to a chilly, determined retreat. A century of prestige, tens of thousands of employment, and billions of dollars in investments vanished along with the luxury when the headlines stopped. What then went wrong? Was this a tariff issue or something else entirely? Is luxury changing or dying? And what happens if the most reputable companies in the world stop believing in us? This is the unexpected story, the unraveling for which no one is ready. Keep reading because the final chapter does more than simply recount the events. Trump's tariff that destroyed everything. There was no uncertainty about the cause of the explosion. 4 weeks prior, the global car industry was rocked by the 12 words that President Donald John Trump, who was well into his second administration, had released. The message, which was typed late at night on Truth Social, said, "If you don't make it here, don't sell it here." An executive order imposing a 200% levy on all foreign-made autos and parts followed the brief and surgically exact digital statement. No compromise was made, not a warning, no news conference. All that was endorsed in quiet was a cruel policy that exploded online. The world viewed it as economic warfare, but the administration referred to it as a restoration of economic sovereignty, regardless of whether a car was built in Seoul or Stuttgart, or if it was a premium SUV or a small. The tariffs were applied uniformly. German automakers were particularly heavily hit because of their highly export-oriented business strategies and highly linked global supply chains. Trump had a clear objective: either drive manufacturing back to the United States or completely exclude foreign competitors from the market. The plan was based on a well-known pledge from his first term: bring industry home. This time, however, the approach wasn't symbolic. It was damaging. Any business that operates internationally saw an instant increase in manufacturing costs as a result of the tariffs. It was a death sentence for businesses like Mercedes, BMW and Audi, that had long made investments in U.S. operations but still depended on European and Asian components. Some Trump fans applauded the action as a patriotic gesture, while others were taken aback by its abrupt scope and velocity. Both conservative and liberal economists cautioned about collateral damage. At a campaign event, however, the president remained defiant, saying, "We've been too nice for too long. We're playing hardball now. The German automakers just couldn't handle it. They weren't unprepared." Why Audi, BMW, and Mercedes had no options. There was no outburst during the retreat. Math was involved. Furthermore, the figures were honest. The German car manufacturers had established a lucrative ecosystem in the U.S. for decades by combining imported parts with local assembly. The headquarters of Mercedes-Benz were located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. BMW operated the world's largest facility in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Despite producing fewer cars in America, Audi transported hundreds of thousands of foreign automobiles through American ports every year. However, not all of those cars were manufactured in the United States. The engine control unit was imported from Germany, although the chassis may have been put together in Alabama. Slovakian digital displays, the South Korean battery systems. The international precision ballet was flawless until the Trump tariffs threw a wrench in its gears. The imposition of a 200% tariff on foreign components made even American-assembled vehicles unaffordable due to component costs. According to Mercedes, the GLS class SUV alone now costs around $15,000 more per unit due to tariffs. Overnight, BMW's plug-in hybrids, which were already experiencing margin pressure, lost their profitability. Audi's premium automobiles that were imported turned into showroom poison. The businesses tested the models in all possible financial scenarios, including price rises, supplier reorganizations, and component substitutions, but none of them were successful. Either the firms would lose money on every sale, or the cars would become so costly that no one would purchase them. The results reached in internal board sessions were unanimous. Mercedes referred to it as unsustainable, BMW as strategically incompatible, and Audi as an extinction-level event. The tariff wall put up by Washington was too great to be compensated for even by state government subsidies. This was not an instance of resistance to change. The ambush was industrial. Furthermore, complete withdrawal was the only option left to the German automakers. What about the actual tragedy? The Americans departed. We make sure that stories like this get to you first, even though they don't make the evening news. Let us know how this is happening where you live by leaving a comment and subscribing right away. The betrayal of America. Dealers left dead. The fallout struck like a slow-motion bomb throughout the nation. Former bastions of luxury and customer service, Mercedes-Benz dealerships in Los Angeles, Miami, and Houston, were not given any prior notice. Before internal dealer notes could be delivered, the press release became viral on social media. A buyer in Denver displayed the headline on their phone to a dealership manager who was receiving a delivery of GLC vehicles. By midday, sales lines were backed up with terror rather than questions. Dealerships had developed their brand equity over decades. Millions were spent on customer experience initiatives, employee training, and showroom upgrades that were especially designed for the German brands. Franchisees were taken by surprise, even though many of them had long-term agreements with the manufacturers. Without marketing pipelines, factory assistance, or new inventory, their firms were essentially stuck in a rut. The floor models were turned into museum exhibits. Questions about warranties poured in. Consumers wanted to know if financing packages were null and void, if parts would still be accessible, and if they should return their cars before it was too late. Suddenly, service departments, which are undoubtedly the foundation of most dealerships, were in a state of uncertainty. Even basic maintenance became difficult without access to certified replacement parts, firmware patches, or updated diagnostic tools. The most concerned were owners of more recent models, who saw a future in which a broken sensor would result in weeks of delays or outright incompatibility. Within 48 hours, several dealerships started laying off employees. Others, unable to handle the uncertainty, closed completely in a few weeks. But it was treachery, not just business. Dealership owners had been devoted collaborators, helping to establish the German brands in markets ranging from Milwaukee to Manhattan. They were now being abandoned to crumble under the weight of choices made far away. Citing breach of contract, some dealership groups contemplated taking legal action. Others just vented to the local media, accusing the government of economic sabotage and the automakers of cowardice. The repercussions were significantly worse in communities where these dealerships served as major economic hubs. Small businesses that centered around the prestige ecology, such as loan agencies, tire shops, car washes, and detailers, were left behind. The harm was profoundly personal as well as commercial. This was the unraveling of a decades-long fabric, the collapse of a local economic environment. What about Wall Street? They anticipated it. Who profited first from Wall Street's whiplash? A quiet sell-off had already started before the news outlets sent out their press releases. Dealerships were alerted, and staff members were led into emergency town halls. Insiders on Wall Street who had enough connections to detect seismic movements before they became apparent began to take action. Volkswagen AG, BMW Group, and Daimler AG shares started to exhibit mild volatility, not enough to set off sirens, but enough to make people who are attentively observing take notice. The market had already partially adjusted by the time the public became aware of the German exodus. Millions were made by traders who had hedged against foreign automakers early. In the days preceding the announcement, investment bank analysts subtly lowered German car stocks, citing geopolitical uncertainty in ambiguous words, as investors conjectured that the lack of European luxury titans may produce a unique window of competitive superiority. Domestic players such as Ford and General Motors experienced temporary increases in their share prices. However, Wall Street's jubilation was short-lived. What started off as a benefit soon turned into a worry. Investors were uneasy about the wider ramifications of a trade war escalation. Stocks of suppliers plummeted, particularly those who provided cross-border services to several manufacturers. The market value of ports, logistics firms, and manufacturers of specialized components fell by double digits. In anticipation of a wider catastrophe, hedge funds started shorting American corporations with significant exposure to Europe. Rumors circulated that executives and influential bankers were engaging in insider trading, purportedly transferring assets days before to the official announcement of the tariffs. Although regulatory agencies conducted discreet investigations, enforcement did not keep pace with the news. Someone had previously played the game. The victors had already received their payouts. A human tragedy had been transformed into an algorithmic advantage by Wall Street. Far from the trading floors, however, a more subdued catastrophe that jeopardized the economic future of an entire generation started to emerge as the markets adjusted. However, as the markets changed, the future of an entire generation fell apart. The demise of automobile education, car manufacturing boom served as the foundation for the curricula of Southern colleges and technical institutes. For more than 2 decades, universities created whole courses centered on drivetrain engineering, mechatronics, sophisticated robotics, and electric powertrain diagnostics, in close collaboration with German automakers. Before they were old enough to vote, South Carolina high school kids were signing up for vocational pipeline programs that promised 6-figure jobs. The path was unobstructed. The employment was assured. The future appeared to be unaffected by anything, until it wasn't. Almost immediately after Mercedes, BMW, and Audi shut down, the entire educational ecology fell apart. A large number of internships were canceled. Programs for cooperative learning with automakers disappeared. Some professors who had been hired from Germany to give innovative courses ended up teaching outdated curricula. Scholarship money dried up. Suddenly, engineering grads realized their degrees were designed for a workforce that had vanished. The only options left to students who had formerly envisioned careers in automotive innovation were to move, retrain, or start over. Many people selected none of the options. Technical program dropout rates increased in South Carolina and Alabama. Enrollment in courses related to automobile manufacture fell precipitously. In an effort to save resources and rebrand quickly enough to be relevant, some community schools started to shift their focus to renewable energy or aerospace. However, the harm had already been done to many. There was a huge psychological cost. Students from entire classes who had grown up in homes that were supported by Mercedes or BMW incomes were suddenly informed that the same industries for which they had studied were vanishing from their area. Staff morale plummeted. Automobile training facilities worth millions of dollars were vacant. The pupils who had been promised futures that did not exist were the one group that authorities were unable to comfort as they frantically changed course. At that point, the workers began to fight back instead of wait. The unforeseen labor uprising. Interstate 20 saw the first roadblock. Drivers of a line of freight trucks carrying German OEM parts stood in front of rigs with placards that said, "We built your cars," refusing to budge. The walkouts followed. You don't get to walk away, not only at the plants which were already being shut down, but also at regional transport hubs, supplier warehouses, and even third-party logistics companies that had experienced an overnight drop in business. Long dormant in several southern states, union organizers found themselves at the epicenter of an unplanned rebellion. Workers poured into temporary organizing halls, many of whom had never been to a union meeting. They want responsibility from businesses, governments, and even the federal government, not better contracts. Loading docks were obstructed. They shackled themselves to the doors of the dealership. Before state police showed up, a supplier warehouse in Georgia was occupied for 2 whole days. It was the uprising's direction, not just its intensity, that set it apart. Employees weren't solely pointing the finger at German automakers. They were pointing the finger at their own leaders. They went after local legislators who had given tax breaks to foreign businesses without providing them with long-term exit protections. State representatives who had pledged employment stability and decades of partnership were questioned. The protests even included white-collar workers who were not members of a union. Alongside factory floor workers were engineers, marketing personnel, and dealership managers. It had to do with treachery, not ideology. These weren't merely occupations. These were homes, lives, and hopes of generations that had been abruptly taken away. America hadn't witnessed a labor movement like that in decades. Furious, well-organized, and very concentrated. It was also not going away. Europe secretly organized a counterattack while laborers rioted. When Germany responds, the world pays attention. Germany's withdrawal from the American market was not peaceful. It responded with economic, diplomatic, and political retaliation. The German government called an emergency conference in Berlin within 24 hours of Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Audi announcing they will stop operations in the United States. In front of a packed press corps, Chancellor Annalena Baerbock said the action was a direct result of what she described as economic sabotage dressed up as patriotism. In private, the European Union triggered its trade response mechanisms, filing a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization and indicating that it would contest the legitimacy of Trump's unilateral tariffs. The coordination of this reaction was what set it apart. Germany had the full support of the European Union, so it wasn't acting alone. Brussels trade envoys started quietly renegotiating long-stalled deals with other big economies, such as Japan, India, and Brazil. Every press release and handshake carried the unsubtle message that the transatlantic trading connection was no longer reliable. Once emblems of globalization, German automakers were now pawns in a much bigger geopolitical chess game, and Europe had decided to turn south and east, away from Washington's unpredictable economic nationalism. The tone of Berlin's public remarks was one of righteous outrage. In a resolution denouncing the tariffs and expressing solidarity with the affected German companies, the European Parliament echoed Germany's finance minister's criticism of the United States for weaponizing tariffs, describing the action as a reckless provocation that undermines decades of post-war cooperation. This was a language of fight rather than one of retreat, and the world's media paid attention. The German response was portrayed in international editorials as a turning point that marked the end of American economic dominance and the start of a multipolar trading age. The cost of playing economic hardball with the EU had just soared, and Europe had set a red line. Europe, however, wasn't merely retaliating verbally. Everything became evident with their next move. They had no intention of returning. The new capital of luxury is China. China threw open its doors if America had closed them. Chinese officials met with executives from Daimler, AG, BMW Group, and Audi in Shanghai within weeks of the German automaker's departure from the United States. A rush of signed memorandums, plant plans, and tax incentives from the local government ensued. The U.S. market was not just replaced by Germany's major three, but it was also improved, at least in terms of economic potential and political stability. In the Guangdong province, new production facilities were announced, and building is expected to start in 6 months. These facilities served as centers for research, software development, and regional planning in addition to being production lines. A more significant change in branding was signaled by BMW's announcement of a flagship design studio in Chengdu. China is now the cultural and creative center of the luxury car business, not just a target market for sales. This realignment was driven by both emotional weariness and economic reasoning. Germany's automakers had had enough of playing defense after years of erratic U.S. policy changes, trade disputes, and last-minute tariff threats. China, however, provided consistency. Its industrial policy was brutally dependable, but its political system was authoritarian. That was more important than Washington's ideological turbulence for businesses that had 10-year projections and billion-dollar investment timetables. China's consumer base had likewise reached a mature stage. Buyers' desire for ostentatious status insignia was an antiquated stereotype. These days, younger, tech-savvy Chinese luxury buyers are drawn to connected ecosystems and sustainable mobility. In response, German automakers developed new electric sedans with integrated ride-sharing capabilities, AI-assisted parking, and biometric startup systems. Beijing was the unspoken victor in all of this. China embraced the future of luxury on its own terms, while the West quarreled over nationalism and tariffs. But changing one's location also meant changing one's identity. Inside the German prestige's Reinvention, the German luxury behemoths faced a formidable task after their American heritage was cut short: how to reimagine a brand that was previously characterized by its supremacy in the U.S. The solution was created via creativity, adaptability, and worldwide rebranding rather than through nostalgia. Mercedes-Benz launched its New Legacy campaign in Europe and Asia, highlighting a future based on digital integration, sustainability, and electric power. The S-Class was now a platform, a software-powered luxury node in a networked lifestyle, rather than the flagship. BMW, on the other hand, changed their branding to highlight experience and emotion. The company's Feel Electric program, which combined driver input with biofeedback technology and real-time customization, was created since it was no longer only focused on performance. Viewers now see smart cities, wellness dashboards, and urban autonomy instead of the classic advertising campaigns with their twisting roads and leather interiors. BMW had stopped selling automobiles. It was marketing the promise of smooth mobility through a high-end, intelligent future. Audi went in a different direction. It started the Beyond the Drive project, a fully digital loyalty program that rewarded customers with tangible benefits like co-branded EV charging areas, concert sponsorships, and special hotel access, capitalizing on its reputation for precision engineering and clean design. The company was evolving from a car manufacturer to a lifestyle facilitator. This post-US, thus German automakers were no longer required to meet American standards. They were allowed to create new meanings of luxury that reflected changing value systems and new markets. Nevertheless, despite all of the worldwide success, something was lacking. Loyal supporters in the US perceived these businesses as having disappeared rather than being revived. For American admirers, however, the brand vanished rather than changed. Underground car culture's Ascent. Garages were lit late into the night all around the United States, not with dealership lights or company logos, but with YouTube instructions, LED headlamps, and socket wrenches. There was a new underground movement, now abandoned by their makers. Owners of Mercedes, BMWs, and Audis gathered in backyard repair shops and internet forums. They were doing more than simply car maintenance. Their legacy was being preserved. The culture of do-it-yourself repairs took off. To import components, exchange diagnostic tips, and even translate service manuals into German, communities combined their efforts. Ad hoc distribution channels for uncommon parts, such as AMG exhaust valves and M-series control arms were established via enthusiast networks. Facebook groups like Loyal to the Three and Audi After America amassed tens of thousands of members. After the exit, owning one of these cars meant belonging to a fraternity bound by pride and perseverance. Others went farther. Custom builders and tuners started turning these cars into one-of-a-kind artwork. Without official oversight or brand warranties, ingenuity took over. Once ordinary sedans were turned into statement pieces by hacking infotainment systems, custom body packages, and retrofitted electric drivetrains. With a Tesla motor and a specially made grille, a Mercedes CLA that had previously blended into suburban lots now roared. In a sense, the culture had become more personal as a result of the German automaker's departure rather than being destroyed. But there was a need for this resurgence. Many owners were forced to perform their own auto maintenance. Traditional ownership gave way to self-sufficiency. In the absence of official parts pipelines and corporate service centers, longer warranties were less expensive. Updates from manufacturers ceased to arrive. What started off as a luxury became a labor of love. But there was something unadulterated and rebellious about that loss. There was no retreat here. On American soil, it was a reinvention. Every garage became a haven as underground car culture grew, and every adherent became a curator of German automotive history. The private sector was already reconsidering something far more significant than tariffs. While the market struggled with that identity transition, they were reconsidering America. The new fear of corporate America, American instability. The United States was regarded as the world's safest major market for many years. Political stability, predictable guidelines, rules that are favorable to business. However, that illusion was destroyed when three of Europe's most influential automakers abruptly left, and one question spread throughout corporate boardrooms around the world. Is it still safe to do business in the United States? It was out of necessity, not philosophy, that multinational corporations started to reevaluate their American imprints. The concept of long-term strategic expansion was being re-examined from a new angle: risk. Unpredictable trade obstacles, abrupt regulatory changes, and political instability were no longer hypothetical issues. They were now operational dangers. In order to map out what a comparable tariff incident may entail in industries like technology, aircraft, and pharmaceuticals, internal risk committees at Fortune 500 companies started conducting scenario stress tests. In order to account for policy-driven revenue volatility, financial institutions introduced additional factors into their lending models. In board meetings, foreign companies started to redline the United States, not as a place to completely avoid, but as one that suddenly needed stronger legal protections, shorter commitment windows, and larger buffers. Meanwhile, rumors about friends-whoring became more widespread. Companies sought to collaborate with nations whose geopolitical agendas were more stable and whose regulatory frameworks were less unstable, rather than bringing their operations to America. On expansion maps, countries like Vietnam, Japan, Australia, and Canada began to show up more frequently. The crisis was not limited to tariffs. A crisis of confidence occurred, and that change in perception was nothing short of existential for a nation that has long positioned itself as the center of global capitalism. Something more profound was dying beneath all of this. Beneath the policy arguments, the business hedging, and the consumer confusion. What died, and what will happen next? A trade accord wasn't the only thing destroyed by the German automaker's departure, and concept was killed. The notion that international markets would always exist, because once it was established, international trade was here to stay. That you would never be turned down if you established trust over many years, made community investments, supported colleges, employed locals, and followed the rules. The illusion has vanished. The idea of market permanence perished in that instant. For more than 60 years, Mercedes-Benz been a part of the American market. The largest BMW facility in the world was located in South Carolina. Audi had spent billions on EV rollouts and technical collaborations. However, it all fell apart with a single tariff order. Once heralded as capitalism's inevitable evolution, globalization now appeared precarious. It could be interrupted by a news conference and a tweet, not by war or economic catastrophe. A new era has dawned, one characterized by economic borders, sovereign markets, and unstable leadership rather than by global integration. Customers felt the shift was instantaneous. However, the mentality change may persist for centuries in organizations. Models of risk will change. One of the primary competencies will be political forecasting. Plans for expansion will include contingencies. The world stopped trusting, but it did not stop trade. What about the automakers? Audi, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz will all be around. They will be creative. They will flourish throughout the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. However, they will recall this event as a warning about the brittleness of even the strongest bonds, rather than as a chapter in their American history. In America, too, various engines will reverberate throughout the roadways. Different emblems will be worn by the dealerships. The customer will adjust. However, the time that just ended, the time of German luxury on American roadways, the time of supposed worldwide presence, will not come back. It was confidence, not luxury, that just disappeared. If you enjoyed this story as much as we did, please subscribe to see more of the truth that isn't in the news, and let us know in the comments if this was a disastrous betrayal or a necessary reset.